All right, well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and that must mean it's time for another Food for Thought Friday. All right, so we're looking at the concept of happiness at work, and this is an idea directly related to last week's examination of organizational justice, job satisfaction, and job commitment. And this week I'm pulling from an article titled, oddly enough, Happiness at Work. Now, as always, I'm going to show a little snippet of the first page of the article somewhere here on the screen, and a link to the article somewhere down below. This article appeared in the 2010 edition of the British Academy of Management Journal. And if you didn't already know, I've got a passion for bridging the gap between behavioral scientific research and real-world practical organizational application. And this article and the research within comes to us from Cynthia D. Fisher at the Bondi University School of Business in Queensland, Australia. So, without further ado, let's get right into the research. And I'm going to read a quick section from Fisher's article right off the start, just to set the stage. And Fisher writes, quote, "The pages that follow, 3 sets of questions about happiness are addressed. Number 1, how has happiness been defined and measured? Number 2, what are the antecedents of happiness? Number 3, what are the consequences of happiness?" Quote. And I love this structure of the research paper because it essentially asks, what are we talking about? How do we create the thing that we're talking about? And why should anyone care? All right, so Fisher gets into some detail, some depth, outlining the current and previous thinking on happiness, all the way back to Aristotle, who wrote about a concept referred as eudaimonia, or happiness, eudaimonia, which was irrelevant to states of being or events, but rather spoke about happiness over the course of life. Now, Aristotle, in the Nicomachean Ethics, argues that life cannot be considered good or eudaimonic or happy until it has been lived in full. So, taking from the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle is reasoning that what makes a good life, he argues, but we must add, quote, "in a complete life, for one swallow does not make a summer, nor does one day, and so too one day or a short time does not make a man blessed or happy." That's a mouthful. What Aristotle is arguing there is we can't say that a life has been happy by taking a snapshot of the life. We need to look at life over the course of time. Just as one swallow doesn't make a summer, one day doesn't make a life, nor does one short period of time make a man blessed or happy. So that's one concept of happiness according to Aristotle. Now, this early thinking on happiness supposed that it was far more than a fleeting or emotional response, right? We've got life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and we say, well, it's that momentary happy state. The early thinking of happiness didn't look at it that way at all. It wasn't some emotional state resulting from some external condition or experience, but it was rather something far greater and can only be assessed over the course of one's life. Now, going back to the article then, Fisher further explains that there's also a hedonic perception of happiness, which is summed up in the general assessment of pleasantness or unpleasantness. So there's a eudaimonic perception of happiness and the hedonistic perception of happiness. And Fisher continues the paper by defining happiness as a general state of subjective well-being, right? So Fisher covers some previous thinking on happiness and then goes on to say, all right, well, for the remainder of this paper, we're going to talk generally about happiness as being subjective well-being. Okay? So that's nice. It's fun. It's good. But to return to the earlier question, why should we care? And this is where we're going to begin to look at happiness at work. Okay, so reading from the research, quote, "When directly investigated, job satisfaction has been found to be modestly stable over 2, 3, and 5 year periods, even for those who change employers and occupations. Well, that's interesting. If the research says that job satisfaction is stable for individuals even when they change employers or occupations, then that must mean that job satisfaction has something to do with factors other than the job itself. Okay, carrying on. This finding suggests that something consistent about the person produces stability in their happiness at work across jobs and over time. Carrying on, one source of stability may be genetic, with RV's 1989 study of monozygotic twins reared apart, concluding that about 30% of the variance in overall job satisfaction is genetically based. End quote. So there seems to be some element of happiness at work which is out of the control of the employer, except to the extent that perhaps by chance the employer is able to recruit, select, and retain for genetic and personality dispositions linked with happiness. Further, there seems to be some evidence suggesting that happiness is the result of environmental factors outside the control of the employing organization. Opening quote, back to the research, opening quote, there is evidence that subjective well-being is, on average, higher among those who are married, who are embedded in supportive social networks, who are employed, who participate in religious and leisure activities, who earn more money, and are of higher occupational and social status, who believe that they're healthy, and who live in a prosperous, democratic, and individualized countries as opposed to poorer, collectivist countries. And then it carries on to say, once basic human needs are met, objective life circumstances account for a modest 8 to 15% of the variance in subjective well-being. This may be the result of an adaptation level, opponent process, and hedonic treadmill phenomenon that act to return happiness to the previous levels relatively quickly as individuals adjust to changes in their circumstances. And I've said this before, increased compensation is not a great driver of motivation or job satisfaction because we quickly return to our baseline or a base state of motivation, or in this case, happiness. All right, so essentially what this means is that for employers, once the basic needs are met, any increase in wage or social status will have limited and short-term impact on subjective well-being due to our quick ability to adapt to current circumstances. Fisher continues, quote, it seems that genes and personality explain some of the person-level variance in happiness, with some individuals being naturally programmed to be happier than others. Research on twins suggested that 50% of the variance in subjective well-being is genetically determined. End quote. Carrying on. Later in the article, Fisher says, research by Frederickson and Lozada suggests that individuals who were flourishing experienced a ratio of 2.9 or more instances of positive affect for every instance of negative affect. In other words, for people who are flourishing on the job, they receive 2.9 times more positive emotion for every instance of negative emotion. And, end quote. I'll insert my own thoughts here. This does remind me of a 2004 article by Lozada and Heafy and a 2013 article by Frederickson on the ratio of positive to negative feedback required to foster high-performance teams. According to that research, high-performance teams, which were marked by greater profitability, greater customer satisfaction, and higher 360-degree feedback ratings, received 5.6 positive feedback instances for every one piece of negative feedback. So if you want high-performance teams, give them more positive feedback rather than just negative feedback. Why? Well, going back to Fisher's article, maybe because it increases subjective well-being in the moment. Maybe, tying it all together. Okay, the research does suggest that there is a diminishing return, meaning that after a certain level, more and more positive feedback has less and less positive impact on performance. But I do think it's safe to say that most of us err on the side of offering far too little positive feedback rather than far too much. So let's get back to the happiness research. Individuals who were flourishing experienced the ratio of 2.9 or more instances of positive affect, that's positive emotion, for every instance of negative affect or negative emotion. End quote. Now, there's quite a lot more contained in this article, suggesting that happiness results from factors outside of the direct impact of the organization. You can check it all yourself if you're interested. That's why I always link these articles. However, we're not quite off the hook in terms of increasing employee happiness at work. You look at table 2, which I'm going to throw on the screen. Okay, table 2, and it's taken from Fisher's research, outlines a collection of job and task characteristics which have been found to increase employee happiness at work. Let's take a look at those factors. Fisher notes that generally, greater quantities of desirable job characteristics are considered better. So greater quantities of these factors on the screen are considered better. However, War's vitamin model suggests that, like some vitamins, increasing the amounts of some job characteristics improve well-being only until deficiencies are overcome and one reaches the recommended daily allowance. Beyond that point, additional amounts are thought to have limited beneficial effects on happiness. Similar to the research on positive feedback, there are increases in positive impact up to a point. There are increases in positive impact from positive affect up to a point. Let's go back to Fisher's article. Fisher continues, further, opening quote, further, there may be some job characteristics that in high quantities actually reduce happiness. Just as it's possible to overdose on some vitamins, for instance, War suggests that it's possible to have too much personal control, too much variety, and too much clarity. Okay, so here's the real gold, though, as far as I'm concerned, and these are job level attributes that have been found to result in greater employee happiness, job satisfaction, and job commitment. Number 1, leader behavior. All right, you thought we were off the hook because we talked about genetics. Leader behavior. Leader-member exchange. That's the relationship between the leader and their team member. Trust in the leader. These result in greater employee happiness and job satisfaction and job commitment. Trust in the leader. Autonomy support. Pleasant relationship with others. Of course, this is only one source of evidence, and we know from evidence-based practice that we need to make decisions based on the analysis of all of the best available evidence sources. But I do find it interesting that of all the job level factors contributing to employee happiness, 4 out of 5 that I just listed were in direct control of the leader. 80% of the factors contributing to employee happiness had nothing to do with policy, nothing to do with HR practices. Sorry, folks, it's the research. Nothing to do with pay or compensation, but everything to do with their direct supervisor. So here's the big question. Why should we care? Well, according to Fisher, quote, trait positive affect, that's happiness, is a strong predictor of reduced morbidity and increased longevity among older adults, and both state and trait positive affect are associated with reduced symptoms of ill health and pain, end quote. So why should we care if our team members are happy? Well, for one thing, it decreases expenses related to paid sick leave and premiums related to disability insurance claims. Sorry to be so clinical about that. I'm going to wrap this up with a final reading from the research paper itself. Opening quote. There's evidence that average employee satisfaction within a work unit is often related to hard and soft unit level outcomes. In what's been called the linkage research, the case for average employee attitudes driving business performance has been made in the popular business press, with employee satisfaction touted as a possible lead indicator of later customer satisfaction and financial performance in balanced scorecard approaches. Unit level employee satisfaction predicts customer satisfaction, and perceptions of service quality. Unit engagement and business unit outcomes showed that average employee engagement at unit level was significantly related to customer satisfaction, profitability, productivity, employee turnover, and safety. In sum, the evidence suggests that happiness at work does matter, not just to employees, but also to organizations. End quote. So once again, how do we increase happiness at the unit level at work? Number one, leader behavior. Treat people with distributive and procedural justice and equity. Remember last week's article and last week's video, and if you don't, go back and watch that. Number two, leader-member exchange. Positive exchange relationships between the leader and the team member predict positive outcomes. And this is far more than treating people as a number or a means of production. And we might hear, well, our people are our greatest asset. And if you've said this or you've thought this or this is your philosophy, I would highly encourage you to stop thinking of people as a mere asset, a mere factor of production, and begin thinking of people as people. Whole, complete persons. Next one, number three, I believe it is, trust in the leader. Trust can be split into two different buckets, affective trust, and this essentially asks the question, can I come to my leader with a problem or a concern and trust that this is a psychologically safe space to discuss? And cognitive trust. Do I trust my leader is competent to deliver on their accountabilities? So cognitive trust, affective trust. Number four, autonomy support. Do I have autonomy or micromanagement? Do I have the support I need for the task that I'm accountable to? Last one is pleasant relationships with others. Am I isolated as a lone wolf, or are there others who can come alongside me, who I can come alongside with and build meaningful relationships with? So those are the contributing factors to employee happiness. The question then is, why should we care? To summarize, here they are. Employee happiness at work has found to result in increased customer satisfaction, decreased insurance premiums, increased financial performance, increased customer perceptions of service quality, decreased employee turnover, increased safety ratings. Okay. So there we go. Happiness at work. It's more than just hand-holding and kumbaya. It's bottom line profitability. And it's putting the humanity back into the world of work. We like to say, it's putting the human back into human resources. Hope that helps.